So we're going to start with asking Leah and Ed to ask each other a question. So maybe, are you ready to start, Leah?
Well, in the spirit of what you opened with, Baba Ed, in terms of, talking about vulnerability and mistakes and, just being really brutally honest, I would love to hear from you what you think our current generation of activists is getting wrong.
Okay, I had never thought anybody would want to hear what I actually think about this, but you've given me a chance to do it, and I'm going to do it. I'm afraid that part of the way we have embraced aspects of identity politics take us away from some of the things that I think are necessary for us to win. My approach to this whole thing, I want to win. And so I want all the folk who will help me win engaged in helping to win. So I'm not all that worried about what took them so long to want to fight against this system. I'm happy that they are now fighting it, and I want to help clarify why they should fight it. And I think that for all of us to understand the relationship, the interrelationship between power and privilege is one of the ways, because there's an assumption that can be taken place from the outside that everybody with privilege has an equivalent level layer of power, when indeed the way that it works is that the people with the most power are able to confer an amount of privilege on a buffer layer that helps to protect them from the people who will one day want to have torches and pitchforks and straighten some stuff out. And this privileged layer, this privileged stratum, and I don't want to call it a privileged class because it's not a single class. It's actually, it can be made up of people of several different classes. Small commodity producers, essentially a petty bourgeoisie, if we can use a French word for it. There are even working class people who can be in a privileged stratum. And certainly the various lowest levels of the bourgeoisie who are not the owning classes can be in a privileged stratum. So the stratum and bureaucrats and a lot of other folk can be in that privileged stratum. And they have a certain level of comfort and a various level of security within the existing system. And sometimes they get damaged in such a way that their security falters and they find themselves no longer being comfortable in protecting the old order. And I welcome them immediately and try to assign them some things that they can do to, one, more deeply understand what the situation is and help to weaken the exploiting classes. And I think that some folk, on the other hand, get this idea of, what took them so long? And we need to get them to own up to the fact that they used to do well. And I'm not against people owning up to what they used to do well, but I'm thinking that that ultimately the task is to figure out how to embrace and include all the way up until people prove themselves not to be willing to continue to struggle against the end. It's like anybody who will help me fight against the folk we need to fight against, the folk I want to be working with. And so I'm not going to start out by telling them how mad I am at them for having been slow to realize that they and I have the same enemy. I want to wage some blows while we're together. And if they change their mind later, I figure we got them for all of the stuff they could do while we were together. So. I have a question to you. I had a conversation with a wonderful person who told me that they thought that food should be free. What do you think about that?
I mean, it depends on the context. So if we were to have a gift economy, which we don't, where things are generally, the currency of the community is generosity and so on, that theoretically that could work. But I think in our current economic system, that's an insult to the producer and the consumer. I think all right, I'm tempted to call something out, but I don't know if I want to go there. I'll make it abstract. So I think a parallel that I've experienced in my community is, sometimes in an effort towards, reparations or giving back what's stolen or people addressing white guilt, privilege, sometimes dump a resource on a community maybe that is not ready to receive that resource or organize for that resource. So, with Soulfire Farm, because I had to work 2 jobs and drag my snot-nosed wonderful toddlers along while we built our house, and it was my own blood, and they're big now, but they were little. And there was a lot of snot because it was cold, because we were digging a foundation with shovels, right? And that was our blood in that hole. There's an ownership. We were talking about this on the way. There's an ownership over that project. There's a this is me. And my honor and my dignity is tied up with how it goes, right? If someone were to just sort of drop that all finished right into my lap with a couple of folks that I don't really know that well, we didn't earn that, and we didn't have any part of it. And so there's a way that we're almost, it's not gonna work. The projects don't work. They will fail. And I think of that with food too. Even if I only have $1 to pay for my food, if I paid that $1, that's mine, right? Not to mention that farmers need to get paid, obviously. There's a reason, even though we have a nonprofit, we run our farm as a business because we think it would be disingenuous to train up the next generation of farmers to chase grants. We're gonna train up the next generation of farmers to actually run a business that works. And you're not gonna make a lot of money, but you can make a living farming the way that we live, right? So I disagree with your friend. I do believe in a social safety net. I think that, there's various reasons, from whether you're new to the country or you're nursing a baby or you're out of work, that it makes sense for society to chip in our surplus to make sure that you can purchase the food, but not that it should be free.
Then I got it right, because that's my position exactly.
So I'm going to start with a question. I'm an anti-war activist, and I know that to end war, I have to end the war economy. And so we encourage folks at CODEPINK to grow their local peace economy. And in the process, what we've really seen is that we live in a culture that is the war economy. And Ed, you spoke to habits. And I want to ask the question, though, to both of you. What are the habits that we need to develop that aren't encouraged in the capitalist culture that we live in?
One thing that's not encouraged is actually intelligence and thinking. I mean, it's a problem what we do to children in public schools, because I've seen public schools where they teach kids how to line up in a straight line and not say anything a certain distance from the wall and follow along this block or something. And I'm thinking the only place in adult life where people have to, you're learning how to do something. The only place in adult life where you have to be in a straight line and not talk is either in the military or in prison. So why are we satisfied with teaching our kids how to be soldiers or inmates? And then all of the critical thinking that ought to be going on, why is it missing, and instead you're teaching to a test a non-factual version of American history that's got Columbus discovering America and sailing the ocean blue, and the Nina the Pinta and the Santa Maria, and defending colonialism and exploitation and imperialist genocide? I mean, why is that the history that you're teaching? Why are you insisting that people who may never have any urge to use it, aren't particularly good at it now, probably won't, and in their adult life never use it once, have to focus on certain part of mathematics so we can weed people out into winners and losers, so the people who don't do mathematics can understand they got a job at McDonald's, but it's because they're a failure in life, there's something wrong with them, when there's really not. And many grown, I love mathematics. It's easy for me, but it's not easy for everybody, because there's some other people that singing is easy for, and it's difficult for me. I try to sing, no one can stop me, but you don't want to hear that all that bad. So, I mean, we have an educational thing that the critical thinking that people need to do, again, under this domination of capital, where the question of will we get any money from the federal government, what do ad valorem taxes in the neighborhood do, which schools have which resources, we're doing a terrible job at training a group of critical thinkers who will be capable of taking over the world that they would inherit. So that's one of the things.
Wow, I could listen to you talk for many days. I think listening is a habit that we need to develop. Especially when we're doing movement work and we're thinking about, community self-determination and being the change we want to see. And then we're supposed to come up with a 5, 10, 15-year strategic plan with a group of people in a room, who probably aren't even from that community. And to me, there's a fundamental disconnect there, because if we're not listening responsively and constantly and course shifting and changing, we can't be effective in our work. You know, and at Soulfire, this was literally everything we do came out of community members being like, we don't got any food. Like, our youth are getting locked up. We need a place for them to go. Can they go to Soulfire? Can we do something? There's no farmer training programs. I don't have any land, right? And I don't know what it's gonna be next year. I don't know what it's gonna be in 2 years. And it's not that we mission drift and then we just like do whatever, but I think we have to be very humble. And we have to be willing to say, I don't know. And that's hard because we're trained up in this system where you're supposed to pretend that you know, pretend that you have all the answers. And that listening, I think, extends, beyond the human community. I personally believe that the earth and our ancestors are clamoring for our attention. And they have a lot of the answers, and we're just not taking the time, or we don't have the skills. We've lost the technologies to really listen. I don't know if Baba Ed's religion agrees with this, so I might be diverging here, but, science even agrees, right, that trees talk to each other. So they use carbon, radioactive carbon, and are able to trace that these mother trees, these hub trees, are feeding sugars, they're feeding minerals, they're giving warning messages, not just to their children, but to the children of other species, right? They're collaborating. And so my personal belief, and where this sort of departs from the science, is that when we are actually in contact with a tree, when our bare feet are on the ground over top of the mycelial networks, that we're getting an information upload about how to behave, right? And how to heal and how to do things. And I know for myself personally, since I was a very small child, when I went into the forest, that my ancestors in the earth was whispering to me and telling me reminders of the original instructions. All those things that we've left behind, all that aching for something that we've lost, but we can't even quite remember its name.
No, I fully agree. And there's a little sleight of hand to say I believe in a complex, emergent universe and little else. There isn't anything else. That's big enough. And it's here, and it includes things that are way more complex than I or anybody else am capable of understanding, and it continues to be growing, and yet we are participants in the creation of the world that we will exist for the children yet to come. So absolutely, I don't have any problem with that. I'm glad you're able to learn. We can take your shoes off and stuff. And I think mycelium is wonderful.
Well, building on that a little bit, one of the questions that came in from the audience is, how is Soulfire prepping for climate change, both for practical, i.e. how will we work, grow differently standpoint thinking, and also about our responsibilities as humans?
Yeah, so I'll tell you this quick story. I think it was, which hurricane was in 2012? I always get them all mixed up. Was it Irene, Sandy? It was like in there. And our area was really hard hit. I don't know if you remember, a lot of the farms were, oh, by the way, the increase of hurricanes is connected to climate change, for those who know, right? More energy in the atmosphere, more water in the atmosphere, more hurricanes, right? So let's make sure we're on the same page. And a lot of the farms lost all their topsoil. I know Denison Farm, a sibling farm of ours, they lost a lot of their topsoil, just washed right into the river. And the night of the hurricane, we could hear what sounded like a Mack truck coming through the forest. We went outside with headlamps, and it turned out that this flash flood, this river, was just pouring down off the hillside. There was no even stream there. It was just pouring down. So we woke up Nashima and Emmett, y'all remember this, put shovels in their hands, and started trenching the water so that it wouldn't wash away our sections 1 and 2, which at the time was most of our farm, garlic and everything. But what was amazing about that, besides, looking back and thinking about the grit of our children being raised on the farm, is that because we were using an African technology of mounding, we didn't lose nearly as much topsoil as other farmers, because the water, the way that mounding works is you have these channels that slow down the water. It encourages infiltration, percolation. And there are many technologies that we're using when you do agroforestry, when you do terraces, semi-permanent raised beds, heavy mulches, no-till. All of these things are climate-resilient technologies, right? Relying more on tubers than grains for most of our calories and so forth. And these are the technologies that we're teaching the farmers who come. These are climate-resilient technologies, and they're old. And on the responsibility end of things, in a similar vein, when you are increasing organic matter every year, that's literally sequestering carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere that otherwise would be contributing to that incremental increase of energy in the Earth system. And I recently read a white paper, and while I don't believe in absolutes and this would never happen, if every single farmer adopted similar technologies on their farm, we could literally halt, climate change. The soil has an incredible capacity to be a reservoir. At the same time, to be totally honest with you, I don't know if we're gonna win this fight. I don't know what the future is gonna bring, but I know that it's imperative to do whatever I can within my realm of influence to at least act like we're gonna win, right? At least we'll have a good life in the process.
So Ed, tell us more about a liberated community.
Yeah, I use the phrase liberated zones, and part of it is terminology that I don't know if it grew out of or how long it exactly has existed, but if you think about liberation struggles, often there was a liberated zone in which people would go for respite and kind of getting themselves together and wage some of the forays into the contested areas from that liberated zone. And so when I think about people escaping slavery, I think that they too would have needed a space, a place where they could be. And it's got to have several characteristics. And this comes from, there's an African-American political economist named Lloyd Hogan, and I didn't get a chance to evoke his name, and I wanted to. Lloyd Hogan is 94 years old, just wrote a book on human population dynamics that he just finished at 93. And he still lives in Durham, North Carolina, and I get a chance to go sit down and hang out with him sometimes. And in his book that he wrote in 1984, which was called Principles of Black Political Economy, he analyzes that every sustainable community has two things going on. One, he says, since after about 100 years, everybody who's alive now, think about it, everybody in this room, 100 years from now will probably be dead. And yet this room doesn't have to be empty, because what we will do in the time between now and then is we will reproduce another population to replace this one. So he offers an analysis of the population that it includes not only the living population, but it also includes the dead, and it also includes the children yet to be born, as significant people to care about. So what a liberated zone has, in his terminology, is an internal labor process that reproduces the population, and an external labor process that produces the food that the population requires. If you don't have an internal labor process that's able to reproduce the population, at the end of a generation, it's all over. Everybody, we don't live all that long. If you don't have an external labor process that produces food and stuff that the people in the internal labor process use in the process of producing people, then after less than a generation, it's all over, because people starve to death. And it is the interplay between the two that characterizes every economy, and every economy can be analyzed on how those things exist and what they do. A liberated zone has to do that. It has to be a place, if it is to be a continuous and sustainable community, it has to be a place that produces people, and it has to be able to produce food. And I offer that in order for people to produce food, they also engage in and they produce meaning. So you're producing people, you produce food and stuff, and you produce meaning to make it worthwhile, and then you have to be willing to defend what you have produced. So to me, that's the whole deal. And that the whole realm of the production of meaning has to do with culture and art and spirituality and music and all of the different ways that we engage with each other to make life something other than getting up every day and making sure we have enough to eat and then going to sleep and then waking up and doing it again tomorrow. What we instead, we do something to make our lives meaningful, and that is a life that we're willing to defend and fight to protect. And so I'm conceiving of the fact that I know somebody's got 1,100 acres of land. The Federation of Southern Cooperatives in Epps, Alabama, they have a rural training center, and they need a new building. And I suggested to the new director, Marcus, he said, Ed, how are we going to get the resources to build a new building down here? I said, I have an idea. Why don't we go recruit some young folk from various communities, people, again, who've been thrown away in those communities, and bring them here, let them stay in the existing dorm, teach them something about growing food so they can participate in that and feel productive from the day they get here. Let them have music and culture and a hip-hop studio if they want to make some stuff that they can produce, and bring in some artisans and stuff and teach them how to build the building. Once you build this new building, you will have transformed some people, because again, it's like, what do you mean I'm nothing? I built that, right? And at the same time, you're beginning to building a community that cares enough about itself and what it does to be willing to protect it and defend it and share it and spread it. But when I first offered that, I talked to some people in Detroit about it. And they said, well, we can do that up here too. And maybe there can be a network and a connection between us doing it in one place and another place. And then I hear about something like Wild Seed and So Far. I'm going, those can be, that can be part of it too. And so we could conceivably construct a network of places and spaces where people are engaged in building the new world that we envision on the basis of the people thrown away in the old world and the resources that are coming out of that old world that can be channeled towards something useful and productive. And these are what I refer to as liberated zones that produce people, food, meaning, and is willing to protect what it does. And one last thing I want to say very briefly. We talk a lot about land. Land is incredibly important. Land is foundational. Water is life. Air is essential. That living layer of life on earth is sacred. And everything else is human social production. Everything. And human social production ought to be instrumental to that which is sacred, which is the earth, the air, the water, and life. And what's wrong with capitalism, if you ever need a brief explanation, is it has taken what is sacred and deemed it to be instrumental, and taken what should be instrumental and oppose it as being sacred. That somehow the expansion of capital is sacred and you use up people and the air and the water and the earth in order to get it, capital expansion? My God, what's wrong with that? It's stupid.
So here's another question that's come in. This is for you, Leah. What is white people's role now, especially those of us who want to be involved in farming and sustainable agriculture?
I mean, this is one of those oracle questions. So I've been joking because I've had a little slew of conferences and folks come up to me and they're like, should I buy land in Africa or Maryland? Or like, what do you think I should do with my life? Like, am I meant to be a farmer? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what you need to be doing. I mean, I know there's a whole lot of needs, and I know that the intersection of what the world needs and what you come alive, what makes you come alive, is the thing that needs to be doing, you know? What's that intersection of what is needed by the community and what makes you come alive, your gifts? You know, and we need to always be aware of our intersectional privileges and power, and I appreciate the differentiation between the two. You know, it doesn't make sense for a white person to be, you know, holding the oars and rowing the ship and deciding where it goes when it comes to dismantling racism in the food system. Of course not. You know, it makes sense to listen. It makes sense to follow the lead of, to ask questions. But in order to listen, you know, foundational to that is relationship. You gotta find out what's going on and what's needed. It can't be. There is a place, for sure, for white folks organizing amongst white communities. I actually think if that happened more, we wouldn't have the person in the office that we do right now. So white people actually talking, right? Talking to families, talking to neighbors, building bridges, trying to come to common understanding and bring folks over to a place where they see that we have commonalities, because this divide and conquer strategy is really old. You know, the fact that in upstate New York, where we live, it was a predominantly agricultural, you know, milk, dairy cow economy, which has been replaced by a predominantly prison economy. where the major jobs in a lot of these rural communities are to work in these prisons. And so you have the elected officials from the rural areas pushing real hard for legislation, punitive legislation that's going to increase sentencing and make harsh sentencing for mostly black folks in New York City to come upstate so that there's jobs in their community. And that was strategic. That wasn't an accident, right? To dismantle the price supports for the dairy economy and then have private prisons. Like, all that stuff was very intentional because it does seed divisions. It exacerbates imagined divisions between poor white folks and poor black folks when we need to be working together, right? So build relationships, listen, return resources, lend the skills and knowledge that you have to the priorities that have been listed. It's not like it's hard to figure out what kind of policy change we need, what kind of resource transfer we need, but like figuring out where your passion, skills, and assets lie, and then lending those, to the stated needs of the communities who are most impacted.
Ed, how can what has already been deemed as capital become community wealth? And who are the people already working deeply in this area?
I am so glad you asked that question. There's a problem in the world. There was an NPR program a few years ago. They called it that great big pile of money. And it was trying to describe how the financial crisis 2007, 8 happened. That people were trying to figure out some new forms of investment, and we live in a very mature world system that has led to the accumulation of huge piles of money, and they're all seeking places to be invested to get certain kinds of returns. So a large part of the investment happens now in something I described to people as, I said, you have any idea why virtually every city in this country is run by developers? It's because these are one of the ways that people can find something to do with this gigantic pile of money that they have, is to find something to support. Well, there's some other creative stuff, because there are a lot of community needs that are not being met. There's a lot of infrastructure that's not being done. So there's a possibility, there's a growing workers' co-op movement, but I don't want to deceive anyone into believing that this is robust enough to absorb the entire big pile. It's not, but it can grow, and it's important for it to grow, as well as other kind of cooperative financial things going on in communities. But in order for them to grow, it's not just a thing of throwing money at them. It has to be coupled with a certain level of technical assistance to help people who have never built businesses within those channels to do so. And I was trying to be careful about how I said never built businesses within those channels, because we had to realize a lot of people are building businesses every day that just turn out to be illegal. And that can be everything from something as benign as selling DVDs out of the trunk of your car, to selling hip-hop beats if you don't pay tax on it, to selling weed and other kinds of things that in some states are legal and some other states are illegal, and the federal government is really, really dumb about it. I mean, so there are a lot of different kinds. So a lot of people are forming businesses, they just don't have a business that's structured and actually uses QuickBooks and pays the taxes on time. And you got to be able to do that right now in order to have it sustainable over a period of time, so that someone doesn't come in and close you down and seize all your assets and make miserable the people who have been working really, really hard. So in order to get that kind of stuff done, you do need a couple with technical assistance that talks about developing value propositions and income statements and understanding revenue streams and cost structures. So I'm right now working with some people. We're building a financial cooperative that is national in scope and that is rooted in local community-based lending efforts to identify people within those communities who have productive kind of projects and things that they're interested in. And again, this integrates both the access to capital with the technical assistance training that is needed to help people be successful in those endeavors. So within the last month and a half, we helped a group of immigrants in an immigrant community in Western North Carolina, a group that describes itself as being of mixed status. And you can understand the complexity of what that might mean in the United States right now. Come to buy and own their own trailer park. There's a $250,000 land purchase allowed, a 4-unit trailer park that has room for expansion, and they financed it by themselves raising within local community savings circles $55,000, and they were able to get a loan for the other $195,000 through the financial cooperative that I'm part of. But more than that, the group of people that help sponsor and work with that project on the ground in Asheville, North Carolina, are now coming into the financial cooperative to build a node of the financial cooperative within that community that is going to be part of the Southern Reparations Loan Fund, along with a group of people we have in Charleston, West Virginia, another group of people we have in Lexington, Kentucky, and a new group that we have in Clarksdale, Mississippi, that's doing some really, really exciting work in the 11 county area. So the Southern Reparation Loan Fund is growing to be bigger, and in each of those places we'll be offering technical assistance and access to a pool of capital. So this is part of what it is that we're trying to do to offer. So I just flew into here from San Francisco, where I was at SOCAP, the Social Capital Investors, and we had a couple of panels where we were able to talk about, ownership and the racial wealth divide. I was on one panel, and another panel I was on that talked about this financial cooperative, and there's some interest. And there'll be a prospectus circulating soon to get some people who, well-meaning people that recognize that it is important to put resources back in the community to be the people that help to capitalize this pool of money. And I hope they're not trying to get venture capitalist kind of returns on it, because that's a really, really bad idea. It's not going to happen. Partly because the projects that the people I care about are working on are not going to exploit large numbers of other people, which is ultimately the only way that money comes in anything, because my contention is that the source of value is human labor, and if you see somebody getting really, really rich, it's because they found a way to exploit a little surplus from a whole lot of people. I mean, Google has found an almost magical way to do it without you hardly even knowing they're doing it, to getting you to produce a product that they can sell without you thinking that you've given up anything, but and yet it still is fundamentally a result of human social production in society that they're capitalizing on, and they're building it into capital. They're looking for the highest return on it. That stuff needs to be returned into communities to meet needs and elevate the quality of life.
No, it's okay. I think we actually have to move on to the closing remarks from each of the speakers. So Ed, you've been selected to go first.
Okay, I can wrap this up really quickly. And I want to do it by quoting my friend Lloyd Hogan, again, as he talked about the internal labor process, and paint a picture that he helps paint that I thought was just so fascinating. He says, birthing babies, nurturing them, amusing them, educating them, politicizing them, mystifying them, moralizing them, socializing them, inculcating them into the mysteries of peoplehood, rearing them to adulthood. All of these activities are integral parts of the internal labor process. The internal labor process is the borning ground of human population. It generates the basis of the surviving population. That's from his book, Principles of Black Political Economy. This is what we do with people that we care about. The children, this is where the children yet to be born will be born within those communities. These are made up of people that embrace even those, the living dead, those whose memories we know, those people that we made promises to that are no longer with us. And more than that, even the people before them on whose shoulders we stand, whether they were the ones that absolutely refused to bow down, or they were the ones that had to bow down and take it so that they could birth some babies that would be able to be there and realize the future in the future. All of that is part of that community, and it is for all of that that my life is dedicated in the work that we do, and I believe many, many other people among us here sitting in this room are part of, and that we have to continue to embrace more people to that vision of what community is like, and build that, and build freedom.
So I'm feeling like I want to bring it back a little bit to the personal, just with the last minute or two of what I want to share. I was really resonating with what you said, Baba Ed, in terms of, what do you mean I'm nothing, I built that? And I was remembering when I first came to farming, I was in a point of crisis as a young person. I grew up in a violently racist, rural, white New England town, and just experienced, outright assault and bullying and all kind of stuff. And I didn't have the analysis at that age in my life to understand that it wasn't my personal problem. There wasn't something just wrong with me. really trying to figure out if I, deserve the air that I was breathing. And when I, not to oversimplify it, there's a lot that goes into healing and there's a lot that goes into moving through trauma, but it was when I always went to the earth for solace. I always went to the land. That was my first friend, will be my last, I'm sure. But it's when I got a job on a farm that was a social justice-oriented farm outside of Boston called the Food Project, and we had an opportunity to plant carrots and cilantro and tomatoes and hoe a row and harvest it up, and we fed that food to folks in soup kitchens. We brought it to what they called at the time domestic violence shelters. We ran a low-income farmers market where people could, use SNAP and all that stuff. And I remember at the end of that summer, going back to school, just feeling like I could take it on now, because nobody could tell me I was nothing, right? Because I made something. I fed some people with my hands. And I think, there's a lot we're trying to change, but fundamentally it does come back to that, is that all of us just want some dignity. And we all want to be able to produce something of value and to be something.
Thank you so much, Leah and Ed, and Matt and the board of the Schumacher invite you back here to join us for donuts and apples and a book signing by Leah. So thank you for joining us today.